My empire just collapsed, my daughter is trapped, and the man I thought was dead just aimed a gun at my chest. The mahogany desk smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper, a scent that usually brought me a sense of profound satisfaction. Today it just felt like a heavy anchor dragging me down. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse office, the city sparkled, a sea of diamonds scattered across black velvet, my city, my creation, and soon entirely gone. I leaned back in the Italian leather chair, the soft material conforming perfectly to my weary frame. 55 years, half a century building Sterling Industries from a sputtering regional logistics firm into a global powerhouse worth more zeros than I cared to count. I'd missed birthdays, anniversaries, school plays, sacrificed everything for this empire, not because I loved money, but because I needed the control it represented. Control over chaos, control over my own destiny. But destiny, it seems, has a wicked sense of humor. The diagnosis had been stark, delivered by a doctor whose bedside manner suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Stage 4, aggressive. 6 months, maybe 8 with aggressive treatment, which I'd refused. Why prolong the inevitable, only to watch the vultures circle while I withered away? No, a Sterling doesn't limp off stage. A Sterling detonates on their own terms. Which brought me to the meticulously organized file on my desk, labeled simply, Contingency Delta. Inside were the deeds, the transfer papers, the irrevocable trust amendments. Everything meticulously executed over the last agonizing 3 months. My daughter, Amelia, was my only child. She was 24, brilliant, fiercely independent, and currently studying international law in London. She was also, in my estimation, entirely unequipped to handle the sheer crushing weight of my legacy. She inherited her mother's softness, her tendency to see the good in everyone, even those who deserved nothing but ruin. She would be eaten alive by the sharks I'd spent my life wrestling into submission. I picked up the heavy crystal paperweight shaped like a miniature globe. I had given Amelia everything she'd ever asked for, except the one thing I couldn't bear to part with, the company itself. If I left it to her outright, she'd be destroyed by the responsibility, or worse, manipulated into signing away the very soul of Sterling Industries within a year. So I'd chosen a different path, a brutal path perhaps, a necessary one. The intercom buzzed, startling me from my contemplation. "Mr. Sterling? Your 3 o'clock is here. It's Mr. Davies." Davies, my chief financial officer, a man who had been with me for 20 years and who believed my financial maneuvering was only slightly less divine than walking on water. He was the only other person alive who knew the extent of my illness, and the only one who knew about Contingency Delta. "Send him in, Helen," I clipped, smoothing down the lapel of my Savile Row suit. Davies entered, his usual unflappable veneer slightly frayed around the edges. He carried a slim leather briefcase, not his usual bulky work satchel. "Sir," Davies began, setting the briefcase down gently, "the final documentation is ready for your signature. The offshore holding company is active, the stock dispersal instructions are locked down, and the charity trust is established. It's all irreversible now." I nodded slowly, picking up the titanium pen that had signed contracts worth billions. "Good. Amelia gets the apartment in Paris, the trust fund for her education completion, and the access to the liquid assets in Geneva. That's plenty for a lifetime of comfortable, unburdened living." Davies cleared his throat, his eyes darting to the window, anywhere but at me. "Mr. Sterling, regarding the rest, the controlling interest, the subsidiaries, the patents, it's all transferred to the Meridian Foundation, as per your directive." "Yes, Davies. The foundation dedicated to ecological preservation." I signed the last page with a flourish that felt suspiciously like a death rattle. Davies sighed, a long, shuddering exhale. "She's flying in tomorrow morning, sir. She called an hour ago. She sounds excited about having dinner with you, to celebrate her final exams. She won't be celebrating much tomorrow, Davies." I capped the pen. "Did you tell her everything?" Davies shifted his weight. "Only what you instructed. that you were moving the company holdings into a secure, specialized trust to ensure long-term stability, and that she would be informed of the specifics once the transfer finalized next week. Good man. I stood up, walking to the window again. The sun was starting its slow descent, painting the western sky in shades of violent orange and bruised purple. Davies, you're dismissed. Destroy those internal memos. Leave no trace. Understood, sir. Rest well, Mr. Sterling. The door clicked shut. I was alone with the city and my secret. Tomorrow, Amelia would walk into this room expecting a quiet celebration, maybe a small gift. Instead, she would find a note from her father explaining why her inheritance, the sprawling, powerful entity she'd grown up assuming was hers, was now irrevocably dedicated to saving endangered sea turtles. I smiled, a cold, grim expression that felt alien on my face. She would hate me. She would call me a monster. But she would be safe. The elevator doors chimed softly on the floor below. I recognized the precise timing. Amelia wasn't supposed to arrive until 9 a.m. tomorrow. I checked my watch. 6 p.m. Who was coming up now? Davies assured me the entire executive floor was locked down. A shadow flickered under the door. Then, a faint tapping. Tentative at first, then growing bolder, more insistent. It wasn't the solid knock of security. It was the light, rhythmic urgency of someone familiar with the layout, someone who bypassed the main lobby desk. My blood went ice cold. I hadn't accounted for an early arrival. I grabbed the heavy crystal globe, my knuckles white, just as the latch on my private office door began to turn from the outside. I heard a muffled, almost whispered, female voice on the other side. "Dad, are you in there? I wanted to surprise you." The sound of the lock giving way was sickeningly loud in the sudden, absolute silence of the room. It wasn't Amelia's voice. Amelia's voice, even when excited, held a certain melodic lightness. This voice was lower, breathless, laced with an urgency that tasted metallic, like fear. I dropped the crystal globe back onto the desk with a jarring thud, the sound echoing unnervingly. I immediately spun, putting my body between the door and the desk where the contingency Delta folder lay, now prominently displayed in the fading light. My mind raced, discarding possibilities. Davies was meticulous. He wouldn't have let anyone near the executive floor, unless he hadn't locked down everything. The door swung inward perhaps 6 inches before hitting the heavy brass doorstop I always kept wedged under it. A relic from my very first humble office years ago. "Dad, I know you're in there. Just open the door." The voice, definitely female, definitely frantic, was closer now. It wasn't Amelia. I didn't recognize it. "Who is this?" I managed, my own voice rougher than I intended. I instinctively moved toward the small, ornate panic button hidden beneath the lip of the desk, my fingers seeking the familiar cold metal. "It's about the Foundation, Mr. Sterling," the voice hissed, suddenly sharper, all pretense of casual politeness gone. "They told me you were closing the books early. I need access to the specific offshore routing codes. Now." The Foundation. Not Amelia. Not Davies. Someone else who knew about the transfers, but who thought they were entitled to the inner workings of the charity trust. This complicated things beyond the simple narrative of my planned farewell. I pressed the panic button twice, a silent alarm to security, though I knew they were 5 minutes away at best, operating on lower alert during non-business hours. I had seconds. "You have the wrong office," I lied, moving to shield the desk further. "I am occupied. Leave immediately or I will call security." A low, dangerous laugh met my threat. "Security won't stop me, Robert. They never did." That name. Robert. Only my closest, longest associates and my daughter used that. And the woman, whoever she was, had just used it with the familiarity of someone who expected instant obedience. The 6-inch gap in the door suddenly seemed inadequate. There was a sharp, metallic scraping sound from the other side. She wasn't trying to talk her way in. She was trying to breach the door itself. "I'm giving you 5 seconds to step away from the desk," she warned, her voice tight with barely contained rage, "or I introduce you to the real consequence of trying to dissolve Sterling Industries without consulting the stakeholders." Stakeholders. That word was the key. The charity foundation was Elias Thorne's pet project. Thorne, my long-dead business partner, the man whose near-fatal heart attack 20 years ago had paved my path to sole ownership. His will had been complex, granting his estranged daughter, Vivian, a residual interest in certain partnership assets that only activated upon my death, or a specific trigger event regarding the original partnership equity. A clause I thought I'd successfully circumvented in the early 2000s. If Vivian Thorne was involved, this wasn't about a tame environmental fund, this was about a scorched earth retrieval mission. The scraping stopped. There was a heavy thud, like a shoulder hitting the solid wood. The door shuddered violently against the brass stop. A crack splintered upward from the lower hinge area. "Last chance, Robert." I stared down at the contingency Delta file. If she got her hands on that, she wouldn't just expose my deception to Amelia. She could use the charity transfer loophole to potentially seize control of all the assets before the staggered distribution timeline finished. My attempt to protect Amelia by giving away the company might just end up handing the entire empire and my carefully constructed narrative of a peaceful retirement to the vengeful daughter of my former partner. I had to choose, fight her for the desk or run. Running meant leaving the evidence of my betrayal of Amelia exposed. Fighting meant confronting a woman who clearly felt entitled to violence. Before I could move, the heavy brass doorstop snapped free from the impact, flying across the room and shattering the glass of a framed award on the wall. The door burst inward with explosive force, splintering the frame. Standing there, framed by the destruction, was a woman in a severe black pantsuit, her face tight with fury, her eyes locking immediately onto the desk. But she wasn't holding a gun or a knife. In her hands, she held an industrial-grade crowbar. But it wasn't Vivian Thorne. It was Amelia, my daughter. Her usually soft brown eyes were blazing, sharp and unfamiliar, and she was breathing hard, not from exertion, but from terror. Behind her, just stepping into the doorway, was a massive security guard in an unauthorized dark gray uniform, holding a heavy duffel bag, his face masked by shadow. "You gave away my fortune?" my daughter cried, her voice cracking with disbelief and raw pain as she stared at the finalized documents on the desk. Unaware of my secret plan? The silence that followed Amelia's accusation was thick enough to choke on. It drowned out the distant muffled shouts of my own security team finally arriving, pounding on the outer door that Davies had neglected to secure properly. In that frozen moment, standing between my daughter and the wreckage of my carefully laid plans, the only reality was the shattering betrayal reflected in her eyes. "Amelia," I started, taking a hesitant step toward her, my hands raised in a gesture of surrender that felt both genuine and utterly hollow. "Wait, you don't understand the complexities." "Complexities?" She spat the word out, the crowbar she still clutched shaking slightly. "I understand perfectly, Dad. I spent the last 6 months flying back and forth on private charters, pretending to be ecstatic about my final exams, all while I was meeting with Thorne's lawyers in Zurich." My carefully constructed world tilted violently. Thorne's lawyers? Amelia knew. Vivian Thorne. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the impending doom. I looked past her, locking eyes with the hulking figure lurking in the doorway. The security guard wasn't just a random associate. He was one of the men I had fired 2 years ago for corporate espionage, a man named Kellen, known for his absolute loyalty to anyone who paid more than Sterling Industries ever did. "That man, Kellen, he's not supposed to be here," I roared, pivoting my attention back to Amelia. "What have you done? You brought hired muscle into my headquarters on the eve of my retirement?" Amelia's expression didn't soften. It hardened into something brittle and unforgiving. "You call this retirement, Dad? You call bankrupting your only heir, the person you claim to be protecting, a retirement plan? You were going to leave me with a Parisian apartment and the eternal goodwill of the sea turtles." She kicked the splintered doorframe in frustration. I needed this company, Dad. I needed the power structure. Not because I'm soft, but because I'm the only one who understood what you were really building here. What I was building was an empire, not a playground for your sentimental ideals. I shot back, my voice regaining its familiar, commanding edge, despite the pain shooting through my chest. You would have destroyed it chasing idealism. I secured your future, Amelia. A safe future. Safe? Safe means being a kept woman in a gilded cage. You never respected my ambition. She tossed the crowbar onto the expensive Persian rug with a clang that finally broke the standoff. She advanced one step, her gaze sweeping over the documents on the desk, confirming the devastating loss. I found out about your illness 6 weeks ago, Dad. Not from you, but from Kellen, who has surprisingly good contacts in the oncology wing. The revelation hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing my breath. She knew. She had been monitoring me, just as I had been monitoring the city. The student had become the shadow player. Why didn't you confront me? I whispered, the realization dawning that she had allowed my entire elaborate farewell theater to play out, knowing the script ended with her being cut out. Because I needed you to sign this, Amelia said, her voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone that was more terrifying than any shouting. She reached inside her tailored jacket, not for a pen, but for a slim, cream-colored folder, one I had never seen before. I needed you to believe you were the one in control until the very last second. She slid the folder across the desk, stopping it just short of my shaking hand. The cover was embossed with a single complex symbol, the intertwined logos of Sterling Industries and the original Thorne and Sterling partnership. What is that? I demanded, leaning forward, ignoring the pounding outside the outer office door. That, Amelia said, a slow, triumphant smile finally spreading across her face, a smile utterly devoid of maternal warmth, is the original, legally binding partnership dissolution agreement from 2003, the one you forged to cut out Vivian. Kellen ensured I got the original copy from a secure storage unit Thorne had forgotten about. My blood ran cold again, this time with the icy realization of a mistake made 20 years prior, a hidden vulnerability I had thought buried under layers of corporate restructuring and false paperwork. If you transfer the controlling interest to a charity foundation, even one dedicated to turtles, before dissolving the outstanding partnership liabilities, you breach Clause 4B of the original agreement, Amelia continued, her delivery flawless, like a closing argument. It forces an automatic arbitration hearing, and Vivian Thorne, who is not as quiet as you thought, has already agreed to let me represent her interests in exchange for 40% of the reclaimed assets. She tapped the folder. Which means, Dad, that by signing away the company to the foundation to protect me from managing it, you actually triggered the one clause that legally compels the immediate liquidation of all assets, yours, mine, and the foundation's, to satisfy Thorne's original equity claim. And since I am now legally representing the claimant, I effectively control the entire wind-down process. I stared at the folder, then at my daughter. She hadn't just been preparing for her exams, she had been preparing my downfall, using my own calculated cruelty against me. You orchestrated this entire scenario. I breathed, looking at the destruction she had caused, the hired thug waiting patiently behind her. You used the threat of Vivian Thorne to push me into signing away everything, knowing I wouldn't wait for the lawyers? I knew you wouldn't be able to resist the final masterful chess move, Amelia agreed softly, stepping fully into the room, her eyes piercing mine. You couldn't stand the idea that someone else controlled the narrative of your departure, so you took the bait. The company is mine now, Dad. Or rather, it's about to be systematically dismantled under my supervision. The door to the outer office finally splintered under the pressure of my legitimate security team. Shouts erupted. Mr. Sterling, hold your position. We are breaching. Amelia didn't flinch at the noise. She simply placed her hand flat on the folder, leaning close to her father, the man who had just lost everything. There's just one last thing you need to know before they drag Kellen out of here, Dad, she murmured, her breath catching slightly, a flicker of the girl she once was showing through the ice. The reason I needed the power so badly, it wasn't for prestige. It was because I found something else in those old partnership files you forgot to destroy when you forged the dissolution papers. Something you actively buried because it implicated you in that oil spill cover-up 20 years ago. She paused, her triumphant smile freezing on her face, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror as her gaze darted past my shoulder, fixing on something just beyond my reach. "Dad," she whispered, her voice suddenly stripped bare of all malice, raw with panic. "Kellen isn't here for me. He's not working for Thorn. He's here for you." The terror that flooded Amelia's face was so immediate, so absolute, that it eclipsed the shock of her betrayal. For a split second, I forgot the folder, the foundation, and the ruins of my empire. I instinctively whirled around, my old instincts for threat assessment kicking in, preparing to face the looming silhouette of Kellen, the disgraced ex-security chief. But Kellen hadn't moved. He remained just inside the shattered doorway, utterly still, the heavy duffel bag hanging loosely from one hand. His shadowed face, previously obscured by the dark light of the hallway, seemed to be angled strangely, focusing not on me, but on the very desk Amelia and I were standing beside. "Amelia, what are you looking at?" I demanded, spinning back to face her, my hand blindly sweeping the desk for any weapon, a letter opener, a heavy stapler, anything against a man built like a brick wall. Amelia didn't answer me. Her eyes were wide, fixed on a point just over my shoulder, her breath hitching in a shallow, useless gasp. The desk. "Dad, the papers on the desk." My legitimate security team was now breaching the outer door. I could hear the heavy battering rams and the shouts growing closer, an orchestra of impending chaos. But the immediate threat was already inside, standing silently between me and escape. I forced myself to look back at the desk, at the contingency Delta file, and the scattered remnants of my final confession to Amelia. What could possibly make her look like she'd seen a ghost, now that she thought she'd won? Then I saw it. Not in the documents themselves, but beneath them. When Kellen had thrown the crowbar across the room, Amelia had slammed the original Thorn folder onto the desk, right on top of the mess. And now, as the overhead lights caught the surface at a new angle, a dark, damp stain was blooming slowly on the edge of my pristine mahogany. It wasn't polish, it was crimson. I remembered the thud of the crystal globe when I dropped it. I remembered the sharp crack as the door broke. I remembered the heavy, wet smash when the doorstop had ripped free. I had dropped the globe directly onto the spot where Kellen's shadow was currently falling. "The doorstop," I muttered, realizing the crystal globe hadn't just shattered the award glass, it had ricocheted. Amelia's eyes tracked my realization, moving from the desk stain to Kellen's motionless form. "He didn't move," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's been standing there since I walked in. He hasn't blinked." I took a cautious step away from the desk, toward the inner sanctum of my private washroom, needing space, needing a distraction. Kellen remained rooted, an unmoving statue guarding the shattered doorway. He wasn't looking at the desk anymore. He was looking directly at Amelia, his shadowed face betraying nothing. "Kellen," I called out, attempting to use the name Davies had used earlier, trying to reassert some semblance of command. "Stand down. My security is about to enter. You are trespassing." Kellen didn't respond. He didn't even look at me. "He's not listening to you, Dad," Amelia said, her voice regaining a desperate sharpness as she backed away from the desk, putting distance between herself and the spreading crimson stain. "He's waiting for something." The outer door finally gave way with a terrifying, splintering noise. Two of my most trusted bodyguards, armed and shouting, burst into the office space, instantly identifying the hulking figure blocking the entrance as a hostile intruder. "Freeze! Drop the weapon!" one shouted, leveling his sidearm. Kellen still didn't react to the legitimate threat facing him. He only moved when Amelia did. As she took her final step backward, drawing clear of the desk, Kellen finally, slowly, raised his arm. He wasn't raising the duffel bag. He was opening his other hand, the one that had been hidden against his side. In it, nestled against his palm, was a small, matte black device. "He's not here for the company, Amelia," I choked out, my entire body tensing for the final, inevitable collision. "He's here for the mess I left 20 years ago, the one you just uncovered." Kellen pressed the activation stud on the device. A high-pitched, oscillating whine immediately filled the air, cutting through the shouts of the approaching guards. It was a frequency I recognized instantly from my military-grade counter-surveillance training, a focused pulse designed to disrupt electronics, communication, and at close range, central nervous systems. My vision swam. The lights flickered violently. The shouting of my guards dissolved into garbled static. Amelia screamed, clutching her head, dropping the Thorn folder. Kellen took his first real step forward, ignoring the armed guards who were now convulsing slightly under the effect of the pulse, their weapons falling uselessly to the floor. He moved with chilling deliberation toward the desk. He wasn't heading for the spilled documents confirming my betrayal. He was heading straight for the dark stain, right where the crystal globe had struck. As Kellen reached the desk, he dropped the duffel bag. It hit the ground with a muffled, heavy thud, but what spilled out wasn't weapons or files. It was a collection of tarnished, antique silver lockets and small leather-bound journals. The belongings of the 5 people I had officially claimed had left Sterling Industries quietly over the years, the ones who vanished after the oil spill cover-up. Kellen looked down at the scattered remnants of his past. Then slowly, agonizingly, he looked up at me and Amelia. His face still shrouded in shadow, but his intent crystal clear. He wasn't looking for retribution. He was looking for closure. "It's not a pulse generator, Dad," Amelia gasped, collapsing to her knees, her hands tearing at her ears. "It's a detonator." The mahogany desk felt cold beneath my fingertips, the polished surface reflecting the dim light filtering through the heavy velvet curtains. I sat there, precisely where I'd sat for the last 30 years, signing the last sheaf of documents. The air in my study was thick with the scent of old leather and finality. Today, my empire, the sprawling conglomerate known globally as Sterling Corp., was no more. It was a shell, a historical footnote, and tomorrow the press would have a field day. My daughter, Clara, was everything I had worked for and everything I was about to lose, or perhaps everything I was about to save. She walked in just as I placed my Mont Blanc pen down. She was vibrant, radiating the relentless energy of youth, completely oblivious to the silent detonation that had just occurred across the financial district. Her face, usually sharp with ambition, was softened by concern. "Dad, you're still down here? Mom wanted to know if you were coming up for the anniversary dinner," she said, her voice carrying the melodic cadence of old money and good breeding. She glanced at the stacks of papers, her brow furrowing slightly. "What's all this? More restructuring? You always get this look when you're deep in the weeds." I forced a smile, a practiced maneuver that had convinced boards of directors and hostile bidders alike. "Just clearing the decks, my dear. Tidying up loose ends before the big announcement next week." The big announcement. That was my final masterful piece of misdirection. Next week, the market would react to the asset liquidation, the supposed collapse of Sterling Corp., and panic would ensue. Everyone, including Clara, would believe I had gambled one last time and lost spectacularly. They would see me as the foolish, prideful patriarch whose empire crumbled under his own weight. "We'll try not to overdo it," she chided gently, walking around the desk to lean against the edge, her posture radiating trust. "You know how much stress you carry. And speaking of stress, I had a meeting today with Mr. Thorn from Zenith Investments. He seemed very interested in the preliminary acquisition talks." My internal alarm bells, usually muted by years of calculated risk, screamed a warning. Thorn, that vulture. He was the man I had been actively avoiding, the one poised to swoop in the moment I showed any sign of weakness. "Thorn?" I repeated, injecting just enough surprise into my tone. "He's being persistent, then." Clara laughed, a bright, dismissive sound. Persistent is an understatement. He practically cornered me by the coffee station. He asked specifically about the real estate portfolio, the one downtown, the Crown Towers complex. He said if the price was right, Zenith would take it off our hands immediately. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. The Crown Towers complex. That wasn't just real estate. It was the digital vault. It housed the one thing I couldn't let Thorne or anyone else touch, the true source of Sterling Corp's actual hidden value. "And what did you tell him, Clara?" I asked, my voice dangerously level. I needed her to say she brushed him off, that she redirected him to legal counsel to me. Clara straightened up, her eyes sparkling with pride, a dangerous light that made me realize, with a sickening lurch, that she had been trying to help. She thought she was securing a good deal for the family, for my legacy. I told him that if he was serious, we needed to see the final offer on the entire holding structure, not just pieces. I told him I had your implicit authorization to discuss the final exit strategy, Dad. I told him that if he could meet our valuation for the whole thing, you wouldn't stand in the way. The air left my lungs. The papers on the desk weren't the liquidation notices. They were the final transfer documents signed this morning, giving Zenith exactly what they wanted, the entire physical structure, including the hidden server farm beneath Crown Towers, transferring ownership in less than 48 hours. I hadn't been signing away the company. I'd been signing away the escape route. You authorized the sale of the entire asset base to Zenith? I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Clara beamed, mistaking my shock for paternal approval. Yes, I moved fast, I know, but Thorne said his board needed a commitment by Thursday, and I didn't want to miss the window. I did good, right, Dad? I secured the best possible price for Sterling Corp before the market realizes the bad news next week. She paused, noticing the stark ashen color of my face, the sudden tremor in my hand as I gripped the edge of the desk. Her proud smile faltered. Dad? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. And then, the true horror dawned on her face as she looked past my shoulder toward the heavy antique safe built into the wall, the safe that contained the physical keys to the offshore accounts, the only liquid assets left after today's maneuvers, which she knew I always kept locked, even during business hours. The safe door was ajar, just slightly, and inside, where the heavy black ledger detailing my true contingency fund should have been, there was only a single crisp white envelope addressed to me, sealed with an unfamiliar silver crest I had never seen before. My vision tunneled. The familiar scent of aged paper and expensive wood suddenly seemed suffocating. The safe wasn't just slightly ajar. The heavy steel door was swinging open, revealing the empty, padded interior where the ledger, my life raft, the only proof of the legitimate wealth I had carefully siphoned away from Sterling Corp's collapsing facade, was supposed to be. The safe, Clara breathed, her voice barely a rasp. She took a stumbling step back, her eyes wide with dawning horror, shifting from the open safe to my face, then back again. Dad, who else has the combination? Only you, me, and... She stopped, unable to complete the thought, but the implication hung heavy in the air, and the lawyers who drew up the final asset transfers. I pushed myself away from the desk, the movement stiff, propelled by a primal surge of adrenaline. 30 years of meticulous planning, the careful cultivation of chaos to mask a quiet extraction, all hinging on that ledger remaining secured until the final signature was dry. If Thorne, or someone acting on his behalf, had managed to access the safe before the final Zenith transfer completed tomorrow morning, then they hadn't just bought the buildings. They had bought the key to my entire future. It wasn't Thorne, I growled, moving toward the safe, my mind racing through contingency protocols I hadn't needed to activate in decades. Thorne only cares about the physical assets. He wouldn't know what that ledger signifies. I snatched the silver-crested envelope. The paper felt cold, almost chemically treated, unlike anything in my study. I tore it open, my fingers clumsy with urgency. Inside, there wasn't a message, just a single, high-resolution photograph. It was a picture of a boat. Not just any boat. It was the Serenity, the 120-foot yacht I had purchased under a shell corporation in the Caymans 3 years ago, the one currently docked in a remote private marina in the South Pacific, supposedly awaiting a long-delayed handover to a buyer in Dubai. It was moored precisely where it should be, except for one damning detail in the foreground of the photo: a small black inflatable dinghy tied to the Serenity's swim platform, and standing in that dinghy, silhouetted against the glare of an unseen sun, was a figure. The figure was holding something large and metallic, clearly pointing it directly at the yacht's hull. "What is that, Dad?" Clara demanded, fighting to keep her voice steady as she leaned over my shoulder, peering at the glossy print. "Is that the Serenity? Why would someone photograph it like that?" My heart hammered against my ribs. That figure wasn't just taking a picture. They were making a statement, a threat. And the crest on the envelope matched a symbol I hadn't seen since my earliest days in high-stakes corporate warfare, a symbol associated with a group I thought I had buried forever when I created Sterling Corp. "Clara," I said, my voice dangerously low, "that boat is where every single liquid asset I possess is currently stored, the money that was supposed to keep us safe after the collapse." Her eyes widened in genuine terror now, the facade of the competent executive completely gone. "But that's impossible. You told me everything was secure here, that the offshore accounts were inaccessible until I finalized the Zenith deal." "I lied," I admitted, the word tasting like ash. "I moved everything off the legitimate books 2 months ago. The Zenith deal was the distraction. The paperwork you signed today was intended to make the world think Sterling Corp was worthless, allowing me to walk away clean with the real capital. But someone knew." I looked back at the safe, the gaping maw where the ledger should have been. They hadn't just taken the money, they had taken the map to the money. They had preemptively neutralized my contingency. "Dad, who could know about the Serenity? Who knew about the ledger?" Clara pleaded, grabbing my arm. I looked down at the photograph again, focusing on the silhouette in the dinghy. The shape was vaguely familiar, lean and menacing. I recognized the posture, the way the light caught the curve of the weapon. It wasn't just an operative, it was personal. "The only person who knew the full extent of the contingency," I muttered, a cold dread washing over me, "was the man I trusted more than anyone to help me build this empire 30 years ago. The man who disappeared the day I launched Sterling Corp, presumed dead in a boating accident off the coast of Monaco." I flipped the photograph over. On the back, scrawled in heavy black ink, was a single chilling sentence, a direct echo of a threat I had once dismissed as melodrama. "The inheritance is mine now, Elias. You taught me well how to take what's due." Before I could process the implications, that my supposed dead partner, my betrayed mentor, was back and already sitting on my hidden fortune, the study door burst inward, not with a knock but with a violent impact that shook the very frame. Standing silhouetted in the doorway, holding a silenced automatic weapon aimed squarely at my chest, was a figure who was definitely not Clara's eager Zenith representative. He looked exactly like the silhouette in the photograph, only older, harder, and much, much angrier. The man in the doorway was impossibly tall, his shadow engulfing the ornate Persian rug. He wasn't wearing a corporate suit, he was clad in tactical black, and the weapon felt entirely too casual in his grip. His face, etched with lines that hadn't been there 3 decades ago, held an expression of cold, surgical satisfaction. "Hello, Elias," he drawled, his voice a low rasp that somehow cut through the sudden roaring silence in the room. "I trust the reorganization went smoothly? You always did enjoy your grand theatrics." Clara screamed, a sharp, ragged sound, and instinctively dove behind the heavy desk, knocking over a bronze bust of my predecessor. I barely registered her movement. My entire focus was locked on the man who had just materialized from the presumed dead column of my history. "Marcus," I managed, the name feeling foreign and poisonous on my tongue. "Impossible. I saw the wreckage." Marcus, my former partner, the one who taught me everything about leverage and ruthlessness, smiled, a chilling exposure of teeth. "Wreckage is a relative term, Elias. especially when you have a very good friend in maritime salvage who owes you a favor. You built Sterling Corp on my blueprints. It's only fair I collect the dividends." He gestured slightly with the muzzle of the gun toward the open safe. The ledger was a lovely touch, classic Elias, always keeping the real assets off the main balance sheet. But you forgot the first rule of true collaboration: always secure the emergency exit together. My mind was working at hyper speed. Marcus had the ledger. He had access to the Serenity. He had preemptively neutralized my only means of escape, and now he was here, demanding the final piece of the puzzle, the access codes for the final, untraceable wire transfer, codes I had never written down, never shared, and certainly never intended to give to Zenith or to him. "The Zenith transfer goes through at 9 a.m. tomorrow," I tried, grasping at a lifeline. "The entire corporation, all the physical assets, will be legally his. You'll be left with nothing but a photograph and a ghost ship." Marcus laughed, a dry hacking sound that held no humor. "You think I care about Sterling Corp? That bloated corpse? I care about the capital that built Sterling Corp, the seed money you claimed was lost in the crash you engineered back in '94. He took a deliberate step into the room, forcing me to maintain eye contact over the barrel of his weapon. "The codes, Elias. Now. I want the hard numbers, the encrypted keys. You can explain the tragedy of your death to Clara later." Clara chose that moment to make her move. She didn't rush him. She used her knowledge of the room. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the side credenza, a gift from the Japanese delegation, and hurled it toward the chandelier above Marcus's head. It shattered the thick glass prism closest to the fixture with an explosive crack. The sudden violent noise, coupled with the cascade of falling shards, momentarily broke Marcus's concentration. His eyes flicked upward for a fraction of a second, and his aim wavered. That fraction was all I needed. I didn't try to fight him for the gun. I lunged sideways toward the large, standing globe near the fireplace, kicking it with all my strength. The heavy brass meridian snapped, and the globe, a solid mass of weighted metal and carved wood, rolled with surprising speed directly toward Marcus's feet. He didn't brace himself properly. The globe struck his ankle, throwing his balance completely off. The gun discharged, the sound deafening in the enclosed space, but the shot went wide, embedding itself deep into the leather upholstery of my favorite reading chair. Marcus roared in pain and fury, dropping the weapon slightly as he fought to regain his footing. This was my chance. I dove for the dropped firearm, my fingers brushing the cold steel as Marcus recovered with terrifying speed, ignoring the pain in his ankle. He didn't reach for the gun. Instead, he slammed his elbow back with brutal efficiency, catching me hard on the side of my temple. A blinding white flash exploded behind my eyes. I felt the impact rattle my teeth, and the floor seemed to tilt violently upward to meet my face. Everything went fuzzy, echoing. I dimly registered the sound of Clara screaming my name, the smell of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood in my mouth. I managed to roll, crawling blindly toward the desk, desperately seeking any weapon, any shield. When my vision slowly began to clear, the gun was gone from the floor. Marcus stood over me, breathing heavily, his tactical vest slightly askew. He had retrieved his weapon. He raised it again, deliberately taking his time now, savoring the final moment. "End of the line, Elias," he whispered. But just as his finger tightened on the trigger, a tremendous muffled thud came from directly beneath us. The mahogany floorboards vibrated, a deep, resonant hum that sounded less like structural settling and more like the deep-throated roar of heavy machinery directly below the study, the level where the secret server room of the Crown Towers complex was supposed to be, the room I'd never told Marcus existed, the one only accessible via a seismic lock system. Marcus froze, his eyes darting down to the floor, his composure utterly shattered. "What in God's name was that?" he hissed. Before I could answer, a small red emergency light, a light linked to the Crown Towers seismic security system, a system only I controlled, began to flash insistently from the ventilation grate near the baseboard, blinking a sequence that meant only one thing: intrusion detected. Full lockdown initiated. The seismic thud had been followed by a chilling, high-pitched whine that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. The emergency light on the ventilation grate wasn't just flashing. It was cycling through a complex alarm pattern I hadn't set. A pattern I recognized instantly from the deep-level diagnostics I'd hidden within the Sterling Corp mainframe years ago. Marcus stared at the grate, the professional killer facade momentarily cracking, revealing the deeply rooted corporate strategist underneath. "That's the Crown Tower's deep diagnostics frequency," he barked, his voice tight with disbelief. "That system shouldn't even be active if the asset transfer went through this morning." "It didn't go through," I gasped, spitting out a mouthful of blood. I pushed myself up onto one elbow, ignoring the throbbing pain behind my eye. "The transfer only locks in at 9 a.m. tomorrow. That means someone just activated the emergency hardlock protocol from inside the vault structure." Clara, who had been huddled near the desk, finally understood the gravity of the situation transcending our immediate danger. "The vault? Dad, you said the vault was empty. That the data center was decommissioned after the market correction last year." "It was decommissioned," I managed, dragging myself backward until my shoulder blades hit the solid oak of the filing cabinet. "But I never dismantled the seismic lock. It was designed to register any unauthorized attempt to access the emergency core when the main building systems were offline." I looked at Marcus, a spark of desperate hope fighting through the agony. "If the lock is engaged, it means the physical asset transfer is currently being rejected by the system itself. Zenith won't own the towers at 9 a.m. Marcus roared, whirling around and aiming the gun squarely at the blinking red light on the grate. "You fool! You created a contingency within the contingency. You built a backdoor that can stop the sale?" He fired twice. The heavy steel grate buckled under the impact, but the security light kept blinking, defiantly red. The sound of the silenced shots was immediately swallowed by a new, far more alarming noise. The sound of heavy machinery starting up, not from below, but from the exterior walls of the mansion itself. It sounded like industrial drills. "They're not trying to get in anymore, Marcus," I said, my voice gaining a strange clarity as the adrenaline surged. "They're trying to collapse the building around us." Marcus looked wildly toward the thick velvet curtains concealing the tall windows. He knew this mansion. He helped me commission the security upgrades. The seismic lock engaging at Crown Towers would have triggered an alert in a secure location, a location only 2 people knew. "You called them," Marcus accused, leveling the gun at my chest once more, his eyes blazing with betrayal. "Who did you call, Elias? Who did you trust more than me?" I didn't answer him. I didn't have to. As Marcus shifted his aim, Clara suddenly vaulted over the desk again, not toward a thrown object this time, but directly at the safe. She didn't hesitate. She reached inside the empty compartment, her fingers finding purchase on something small and metallic, tucked deep into the rear corner. A panic button I had forgotten even existed, placed there for emergencies, only I knew how to trigger. She slammed her palm down on it. Instead of an alarm, a low mechanical click echoed through the room, and the wall behind the massive mahogany desk, the wall I had always prided myself on being solid oak paneling, retracted silently, revealing not another room, but a narrow, steeply sloped steel slide disappearing into absolute darkness. It was the emergency escape shaft designed to deposit a single person rapidly into the underground access tunnel network beneath the property. "Clara, no!" I yelled, realizing her intent. She wasn't going to save me. She was saving herself, securing the only remaining path to whatever information Marcus hadn't managed to steal yet. Marcus, seeing the escape route open, didn't hesitate this time. He didn't care about the ledger or the codes anymore. He cared about securing the only living witness who knew the whole story. He lunged for Clara, but she was already halfway down the chute, her silhouette dissolving into the blackness. "You think a drain pipe can save you, you little fool?" Marcus snarled, turning his attention back to me with renewed focus, realizing he was about to lose both targets. But as he pivoted, the floor beneath him gave way, not the controlled collapse from the drills outside, but a specific, localized failure. The section of floor directly beneath where the heavy globe had struck him, the section reinforced decades ago to support the weight of my antique safe, had been subtly sabotaged. It wasn't the seismic lock triggering the failure. It was an internal timer Marcus hadn't known about, linked to the external drill sounds, designed to collapse the floor only when the specific frequency of the Crown Tower's emergency alarm was active. With a sickening crunch of splintering wood and tearing metal, the floor beneath Marcus vanished. He didn't fall neatly. He tumbled, his legs kicking uselessly as he disappeared into the cavity, the sound of his heavy tactical boots echoing as they struck something far below. Silence returned, broken only by my ragged breathing and the steady, persistent thump, thump, thump of the alarm light. I looked down into the dark pit where Marcus had been. The silence below was absolute. Then, from the darkness of the escape chute Clara had taken, a faint, distorted voice echoed up, thin and desperate. "Dad! Dad, I'm down here. But the tunnel is flooding. I can hear water and there's someone waiting at the bottom. They're not wearing tactical gear, Dad. They're wearing a blue uniform." The mention of a blue uniform ripped through the fog of my concussion, instantly snapping my focus tighter than any physical pain. Blue uniform, not corporate espionage, not a rival syndicate. That meant law enforcement, or worse, the government agencies I had spent decades successfully maneuvering around. The only entity sophisticated enough to know about the seismic lock trigger and have operatives waiting at the access point of my deepest secret tunnel network. I scrambled to the edge of the gaping hole where Marcus had fallen, peering down into the void. The rushing sound Clara described wasn't just water. It was the sound of high-pressure municipal pipes bursting, a predictable side effect of activating the deepest structural suppression systems at Crown Towers, a system designed to flood the sub-levels if the core servers were compromised. "Clara, listen to me," I yelled down the shaft, my voice raw. "If there are uniforms, you do not engage. You are an innocent bystander in a corporate failure. Tell them nothing about the Serenity or the offshore accounts. Tell them you were trying to escape a dangerous intruder. But they're trying to pull me out. They're saying they need to secure me." Her voice wavered, thick with panic and the sound of rushing water echoing around her. This was the endgame. Marcus had tried to take my money by force. The authorities, alerted by the seismic system, a system designed for internal failure, not external attack, were moving in to seize the assets under the guise of protecting shareholders from collapse. They were treating Sterling Corp as a failed entity whose remaining physical infrastructure needed immediate federal custodianship. I looked back at the hole Marcus had fallen into. The silence was unnerving. If he was alive, he was trapped. If he wasn't, his men would assume I was dead and move to eliminate Clara before the legal transfer deadline hit at 9 a.m., ensuring the towers fell into Zenith's hands, while the true assets remained untouchable until they could find the ledger Marcus had stolen. There was only one final move left, a move so reckless it bordered on suicidal, yet it was the only way to reclaim the narrative and secure Clara's safety before the authorities solidified their control. I reached into the pocket of my trousers, pulling out the final item I had signed this morning, a small encrypted USB drive, disguised as a simple silver cufflink. This held the master override key for the Crown Tower's seismic system, and crucially, a pre-recorded confession detailing Marcus's criminal enterprise that would clear my name of the implied collapse, while simultaneously proving I was being actively targeted. I jammed the USB drive into the blinking red security port on the damaged ventilation grate. The red light instantly switched to a rapid, aggressive blue, and the roaring machinery noise outside abruptly ceased. The sound of rushing water within the tunnel network immediately quieted, replaced by a low, mechanical hiss of equalization pumps kicking in. Then, a synthetic female voice boomed through the mansion's internal security speakers. A voice I had programmed years ago for absolute emergencies. Override command accepted. External audit protocols activated. All internal personnel are directed to stand down and await federal custodial presence. Sterling Corp assets are hereby placed under temporary judicial review status. Target: Elias Sterling. Compliance verified. I leaned against the filing cabinet, feeling the world steady itself. I had just seized control of the narrative from both Marcus and the incoming federal agents. They couldn't seize the towers legally if the system was under judicial review by my own command. A new sound emerged from the tunnel, the heavy, measured footsteps of men in thick boots. But the urgency was gone. They were slowing down, confirming the system change. "Dad?" Clara's voice returned, clearer now. The water stopped. "I see flashlights. They're talking on radios." "Stay put, Clara. Follow their instructions to the letter. Do not mention the yacht or the funds. You are a victim of corporate fraud committed by Marcus Thorne." I took a deep, painful breath, realizing I was bleeding heavily from the temple wound. I looked down at the pit where Marcus fell. It was empty, save for debris. He must have managed to grab the edge and pull himself onto a lower platform when the water stopped. Just as I was about to retreat and play the role of the bewildered, victimized CEO for the arriving agents, a metallic clatter echoed from the pit below, followed by a weak, familiar voice. "Elias, you always kept one secret too many." I didn't look down again. I knew what Marcus was capable of. I looked toward the study door, which remained closed. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked toward 8:55 a.m. In 5 minutes, the asset transfer to Zenith would fail, and the feds would be swarming the property, demanding answers about the mysterious, hidden data core. They would find the confession regarding Marcus, and they would find Clara safe. I walked slowly to my desk, retrieved my Mont Blanc pen, and picked up the final unsigned document from the Zenith acquisition, the one confirming the transfer of the physical assets. It was now worthless, but it was evidence of my intended compliance. I laid it neatly on the blotter. Then I walked to the massive bay window, the velvet curtains heavy and dark. I reached behind the heavy drapery and pressed a nearly invisible button disguised as a decorative nail head. With a low hiss, the window, rated to withstand hurricane-force winds, slid inward, revealing the cool, early morning air. I stepped out onto the narrow stone ledge. I looked down one last time, not at the ground, but across the estate lawn. There, parked discreetly behind the overgrown rhododendrons, was a nondescript matte black SUV with tinted windows. It was my true exit strategy, a path Marcus and the feds would never anticipate. I glanced back at the study, listening to the distant sound of the front door shattering under federal battering rams. They would find the broken safe, the dropped gun, the concussion wound, and the confession. They would find Clara, safe but shaken, and they would secure the building. They would find evidence of a massive internal conspiracy that ruined my empire, but they wouldn't find Elias Sterling. I took one final deep breath of the cool morning air, the scent of damp earth overriding the smell of blood and gunpowder. Then I swung my leg over the stone ledge, stepping out onto the narrow exterior molding, and began the long, silent walk across the roofline toward the waiting SUV. The true fortune, the capital safe in the Caymans, now secured, ready for a new beginning, leaving behind only the ghost of the empire I had just intentionally dismantled.